What's up guys, and welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Origins Overview, and this time it's Generation 1. Now if you guys didn't spot the first video I did on this sort of topic, it was for Generation 7 as soon as it came out, so I went over all the new Pokemon in Generation 7, gave brief sort of, definitions of their names, where they came from, and also what the designs are based on. So obviously I'll do a similar thing here, and eventually I'll do the same thing for Generation 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Of course, I have a few videos out for Generation 1 Pokemon. I have like Bulbasaur line, Charmander line, Squirtle line, so of course if you want to see some more detail about some of these Pokemon, you can search for that in the Pokemon Origins playlist. But let's just jump in because this video should take a while, but we'll see how we go. First up we have Bulbasaur, Ivysaur and Venusaur. Of course they all have saur in the name, and that comes from the ancient Greek for lizard, so obviously them prefixing with bulb, ivy, both related to grass and plants, bulbs and ivy, and then Venus, obviously Venus is a bit of a different one, but that probably comes from Venus flytrap, so that's where that links in there. In terms of their basis, of course, Bulbasaur is sort of, in the terms of the body shape, they're based on Dicynodonts, which were mammal-like reptiles from a long time ago, basically, so the same sort of body shape along the road. And then in terms of sort of their backs, we have of course a bulb on Bulbasaur's back, and then both Ivysaur and Venusaur have a flower called the Rafflesia arnoldi flower, and it's a very stinky flower, and yeah, that's pretty much it for that line. Of course we also have Mega Venusaur, although the design is pretty much the same as normal Venusaur. You could just say the flower opens up a bit and a couple more leaves and vines. Then moving on to look at Charmander, Charmeleon and Charizard. Of course they are very similar in terms of their naming. We have Char and then another word, so Char of course means to burn. Then for Charmander we have Salamander, i.e. a lizard, so the fire lizard. Charmeleon we have Chameleon. Now while it doesn't actually look like a chameleon, that's where the name does come from. And of course Charizard has lizard at the end. In terms of the whole line, they're based on of course lizards, thanks to the naming there, as well as salamanders. And in terms of Charizard, of course, it's based on your general European dragon. There's nothing too fancy about it, it's more just European dragon, nothing too much extra there. Of course we also have Mega Charizard X and Mega Charizard Y. In terms of what they're based on, it's very similar, dragons, but Mega Charizard X of course based more on like a black dragon, blue fire, obviously hinting at higher temperatures, whereas Mega Charizard Y, it's bigger wingspan, sort of looks like a bit like a pterosaur, but there could be some dinosaur linking in there as well as the lizard, because of course dinosaurs were lizards, so it makes a lot of sense there. Then moving on to the final starter line, we have of course Squirtle, Wartortle and Blastoise. Squirtle's name is a combination of squirt and turtle because it's a water type, it squirts, but you can also have squirrel in there. Wartortle, combination of war, tortoise and turtle, and then Blastoise is a combination of blast and tortoise. So of course Squirtle with the squirt and the squirrel because its tail looks a bit like a squirrel. Tortoise and turtle for Wartortle and Blastoise because they are basically tortoise turtle hybrids almost. Turtle because of water, tortoise because of their overall shape. In terms of the bases, of course turtles play a very big part, but in terms of Wartortle we could have Minagame, which is basically a turtle which had sort of a tail, seaweed as a tail, and it was very old, and it links in with a lot of Wartortle's Blastoise Pokédex entries, so it's very linking in there. In terms of Blastoise though, of course the sort of the guns, I suppose you can call them, or cannons, are of course based on tanks, so that's sort of where a bit of the bulkiness comes from there. Of course, once more we have Mega Blastoise, very similar however, and there's not much change in the design apart from extra hand cannons, just linking into the tank once more. Then, if we go on to some bugs, we have Caterpie, Metapod and Butterfree. Caterpie's name of course comes from caterpillar. Metapod is a combination of metamorphosis, i.e. what Caterpie does along the lines, it changes its body shape, as well as pod, because it's like a little pod. And then Butterfree, combination of butterfly and free, because why not? Caterpie of course is based on a caterpillar. Who would have guessed that? There's not really too much of an argument there, but in general mostly resembles an Asian swallowtail because it looks most like it. Metapod of course is a chrysalis, there's nothing to sort of argue about there. And then Butterfree in terms of based on the butterfly, who would have guessed, and it's based on the black veined white butterfly because of its white wings and black wings, who would have guessed there. Then more bugs to follow. Of course we have Weedle, Kakuna and Beedrill. Weedle is a combination of a worm and a needle. Kakuna comes from cocoon, and then Beedrill is a combination of bee and drill. In terms of the basis, of course Weedle is based on a larva for bees or wasps. Very simple there. Kakuna is based on sort of what they grow into before they become actual wasps, and of course Beedrill likely based on wasps, even though the name indicates bee, but that's where it links in there. Of course, we also have Mega Beedrill. There's not a huge change in the design apart from bigger spikes, so you could argue it might be based on like a queen bee or a queen wasp because of its larger size, but apart from that, it's very similar in its basis. Next up, going from bugs to birds, we have Pidgey, Pidgeotto and Pidgeot. Now, of course, the names all incorporate pigeon, and then Pidgey is a combination of pigeon and budgie. Pidgeotto then incorporates Pidgeotto, which is Italian for 18, which is the level that Pidgey evolves into Pidgeotto at, which is pretty cool in my opinion. And then Pidgeot is a combination of pigeon and jet due to the high speeds it can fly at. In terms of what actual birds they're based on, it's nothing exact. In terms of Pidgey, it's based on not really a pigeon, despite the name. It could be like a sparrow, possibly is where it best fits in. Of course, going on the lines, you could say maybe sparrow-like on Pidgeotto, and then finally Pidgeot obviously is a proper bird of prey, like an eagle, for example. So that's how that links in there. In terms of Mega Pidgeot, nothing too extra. Again, it gets the more plumage, which is obviously a reference to a lot of birds that have maybe more tropical birds that have good head feathers, I suppose you can call them. But there's nothing too extra to talk about for Mega Pidgeot. Then moving on to Rattata and Raticate. Of course, Rattata is a combination of rat and attack, Rat-attack, and then Raticate is a combination of rat and eradicate, which could be a link to the fact that we don't really like rats, we want to eradicate them. So that's a good one. I won't speak for everyone, but generally they're not very revelled in creatures. But of course, in terms of basis, rats. Who would have guessed there? Who would have guessed? Not me. I mean, maybe you would have guessed it, but rats is indeed what Rattata and Raticate are based on. But Raticate can be extended a bit more to be based more of a muskrat because it is larger and it's got bigger teeth and whiskers and such, rather than just a simple rat. Of course, we also have the Alolan forms for Rattata and Raticate, and obviously the naming of everything is the same. But in terms of the design and the basis, they're based on mobsters, which seems a bit weird, but it makes a bit more sense here because of the fact that you have the little Rattata, you have the little moustache sort of thing, which could be a link in there. Also, the fact that there's a rivalry going on between it and Yungoos in Alola, that's the one. But in terms of the real life basis of it, it could be based on, well, apparently Hawaiian rats tend to be more vicious than other areas of the world, hence the dark typing, I suppose. So that could be sort of a factor to think about there. Moving then to Spearow and Fearow. Spearow's name is a combination of spear and sparrow, and Fearow is a combination of fear and sparrow, linking into the fact that, I guess, sharp beaks and such, and they should be feared. In terms of the basis, again, there isn't a very clear basis for what Spearow and Fearow are based on. Of course, Spearow, yes, okay. Probably it's Sparrow, because the name is a bit there, but you could also incorporate some falcon stuff in there, especially the hooked beak, because that's a very striking resemblance to a falcon. In terms of Fearows, there are a couple hawks, vultures maybe, as well as storks, thanks to its very long beak there. Then looking at Ekans and Arbok, of course the name is either snake backwards or cobra backwards with a K instead of a C, and in terms of what snakes they are actually based on, in terms of actual snake species, Ekans, rattlesnake most likely, thanks to the end of its tail, you can see the rattle sections, and in terms of Arbok, it's a cobra. Not really a huge surprise there, but pretty much just in a cobra, maybe an Indian cobra as well, due to the fact that its frill is not very well. There's no markings, of course, but very similar there. Then of course we have Pikachu and Raichu. Who'd have guessed? The names for these two come from, Pikachu comes from Pika Pika and Choo Choo, so obviously just taking one of each there. In terms of what those actually mean, Pika Pika is onomatopoeia for sparkles, so I guess electricity sparkles and such, and then Choo Choo is the sound of squeaking, so sparkle squeak, so very good name for Pikachu there. In terms of Raichu, it's similar, because of course we have Choo Choo at the end, but of course it also incorporates Rai at the start of the name, which is Japanese for thunder, so thunder squeak makes sense, I suppose. In terms of the basis for the actual animals, they're very similar to mice they are the mouse Pokemon, but very similar in terms of rodents just in general. And of course those long ears could be linked to rabbits rather than rats, because of course rabbits have quite long ears, who would have guessed. Then next up we have Sandshrew and Sandslash. The name's obviously very obvious there. Sandshrew and Shrew for Sandshrew, and then Sand and Slash for Sandslash. In terms of what they're based on, there's a few different things they could be based on, because of course you have the hard backing of Sandshrew's back, whereas you have the spiky backing of Sandslash's back. So Armadillo, of course, could be linking in definitely to Sandshrew. because who would have guessed? Or it could be pangolin, you know, it does resemble that in some aspects. But of course, in terms of Sandslash, you move on more to hedgehogs and porcupines and stuff like that with the spikes. Of course, we also have the Alola version of these two Pokemon with the nice ice typing and basically being based on an igloo and icicles rather than, you know, actual animals. So more of a icy theme there. Next up, we have some more poison types with Nidoran, Nidorina, and Nidoqueen. Now, Nidoran and Nidorina's names are obviously very similar, so they come from basically the same thing, which is Needle, so the Nido, as well as possibly Cenocyte, which is a cell responsible for actually stings in some different animals, probably jellyfish, but you know, it's so Nido there, as well as Needle incorporated, and then Nidoqueen, of course, is from the same ones before, but incorporating Queen as well. In terms of what they're based on, obviously porcupines and stuff factor in once more with the spikes, but they do resemble pretty good, you know, resemblance to rabbits as well, thanks to the large ears. But Nidoqueen herself, probably a gorilla because of the large arms and you know, the large stature, even though it seems a bit weird in terms of that. Then the next line is basically just the same: Nidoran, Nidorina, Nidoking, same sort of names, except you have King as well rather than Queen, so exactly the same animals and everything like that. Then looking at Clefairy and Clefable, the two names, we have Clef and Fairy, with Clef obviously being related to a musical note, and Fairy is obviously fairy, whereas Clefable, obviously Clef works in once more here, but we also have Fable, which of course is like a childhood story, which is just related to the fairy sort of thing again. In terms of their basis, fairies have some, you know, fairly close resemblances to it, obviously they're exactly the same, but the wings on the back and stuff like that, as well as the colouring, links into fairies quite nicely there. Then we have Vulpix and Ninetales. Vulpix's name comes from Vulpes, which is Latin for fox, and 6 referring to the fact that it has 6 tails, whereas Ninetales comes from 9, referring to 9 tails, and then tails or tail as in fairy tale. In terms of the basis, of course, we have foxes in general, but of course Ninetales also very sort of based on the kitsune, of course Japanese legend, many tails, foxes, etc. last for a long time, stuff like that in general. We also have Alolan Fawns, these two, remember, and of course they are based more on Arctic foxes due to the colouring, and then the Ninetales obviously has similar links to the Kitsune, but more Arctic than before. Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff are up next, with of course their names being very similar, but a couple different words here. We have Jiggle and Puff, so Jiggle and then obviously a Puff being the shape of the Pokemon, and then a Wiggle, so Wiggle and Jiggle very similar, and Tuff referring to the tuft of hair on his head. In terms of the basis, obviously balloons is a good guess there, as well as just tufts of, you know, pink balls and such, and then rabbits once more coming again with these long tall ears on Wigglytuff, could be a used reference there. Then we have Zubat and Golbat. Zubat's name comes from Zubato, which is the onomatopoeia for when an edge tool forcibly pierces something, so like fangs going into skin. Golbat, obviously similar but different, based on a combination of Golop and Bat, so Golop being the fact that it's a huge mouth and Bat being the fact that they are bats. In terms of the basis, bats, very obvious there, not too much more detail needed. Then we have some more grass types with Oddish, Gloom and Vileplume. Oddish's name comes from Odd and Radish because it's an odd Pokemon and it looks like a radish, you know, if you would put it in the ground. Gloom comes from just gloom, it's very gloomy, stuff like that. Whereas Vileplume comes from a combination of vile and plume, so vile being the fact that it stinks, it's vile, and then plume obviously being the fact that its flowers, it's pluming, it's, you know, it's a plume on top. In terms of the basis, Oddish obviously based on, you know, radish and stuff like that, whereas Gloom and then by extension Vileplume, again based on the Rafflesia, are non least similar to our initial line Bulbasaur, Ivysaur and Venusaur, thanks to the design there. Then adding some bug to the mix, of course we have Paras and Parasect. Paras's name comes from Parasite, as does Parasect, but of course includes some insect in there. Now these two bases basically are based on insects, particularly the cicada family, but the mushrooms on the back are very, very different. They're actually endoparasitoids, which are basically mushrooms. They're just going to sit on the back and they will take over the host as they do when Parasect evolves, so it's very, very nasty there. Then moving on to some more Pokemon, next up we have Venonat and Venomoth. Of course both those names include Venom, whereas Venonat we have Nat and Venomoth we have a moth, who would have guessed. So now while Venonat's name will indicate it's based on a gnat, its body shape is more similar to a mite because of its general body size, but Venomoth rather is indeed based on a moth, who would have guessed, very simple there. Then we have Diglett and Doug Trio. Now these two, in terms of the names, we have Dig and Singlet, i.e. there's one of them, and then Doug and Trio, so that's very simple there. In terms of the basis of their design, they're probably based on Whack-A-Moles because, you know, very similar to Whack-A-Mole in sort of an arcade game, so nothing too much to go over there. But then the Alolan versions of these two, in terms of the only difference is the hair, of course, and this is based on Pele's hair, which is basically something that happens when a volcano erupts and you get these flows of, you know, volcanic glass that form near volcanoes and can look like hair, as you can see in this photo. Then we have Meowth from Persian follow-up. Of course, Meowth's name comes from meow and mouth, whereas Persian's name comes literally from Persian, i.e. Persian cats. In terms of the design, Meowth, of course, is based on Maneki Neko, which are these cats you see everywhere else. A legend, really, but you know, you can see these lucky cats in places everywhere. So that's where Meowth's design comes from. In terms of Persian, it's not particularly based on a Persian cat, despite the name, but it looks more like a Siamese cat, so that's where that basis can come from there. In terms of the Alolan forms for these two, of course, they're very similar Meowth, but Persian, of course, has this puffier face, but it's again not based on a Persian one. It seems more to resemble a British Horthair because of its large round head, so that's where that comes from there. Then we have Psyduck and Golduck, two ducks to follow up here. We have, of course, Psychic and Duck on the first one, and Golden Duck on the second one. Maybe the names have been switched around, maybe Game Freak, who knows. In terms of the basis, of course, we have possibly ducks because they kind of are, you know, name-wise in ducks, but of course the design could be a platypus, especially for Psyduck there, it looks very similar. But Golduck particularly could have some aspects of a kappa. Now this is a creature or a demon or an imp found in Japanese folklore, lives in obviously rivers and such, and can look like Golduck. Of course it's folklore, so it could take some, you know, inspiration from there. Then we have Mankey and Primeape. Of course, Mankey's name comes from, it could be Mad or it could be Man, and then obviously Monkey, who guessed it, because there's a Mad Pokemon, so Mad Monkey, or it could be similar to a man. Primeape, of course, similar is Prime, so Primal, possibly linking in there, as well as Ape, and linking in there, they are based on monkeys, of course, so apes, monkeys, any sort of primate like that. And then we have Growlithe and Arcanine. Growlithe, of course, combination of Growl and Lith, Lith being in relation to fire, because of course it's a pretty fiery type. Arcanine, similar, Arcane, so Arcane Fire, linking in there, as well as Canine, because of course they are based on dogs of sorts. But in terms of particular basis, they're actually based on Shisha or Komainu, which are mythical creatures inspired by lions, tigers, dogs, etc., and statues that you can see everywhere. Basically guardians, they just repel evil spirits, simply put, as probably Arcanine would anyway. Then some water coming in here, we have Poliwag, Poliwhirl and Poliwrath. Of course, they all incorporate Poliwag. Now, you'll say, what the hell is Poliwag? This was really interesting when I found this out. Poliwag is an outdated term for tadpole, which is okay, it seems weird, but okay. And of course we have Wag because it wagged its tail, Worm because of the word on its stomach, and then Wrath because of its particular wrath there. Poliwag does have some extra, linking in there, as well as being the outdated term for tadpole. It's worth noting that Poliwag literally means head wiggle, whatever that's supposed to mean. In terms of the basis for their whole actual designs, of course they are based on frogs, and tadpoles are frogs, so a tadpole and then an actual frog and then a bigger actual frog. In terms of the particular frog species though, of course we have this design of them seeing, they're supposed to be intestines through the stomach, so it could be based on a glass frog, because glass frog, as you can see, inside it sometimes. So that's those guys for you. Now we're going to get magical Abracadabra and Alakazam. So Abra's name comes from Abracadabra, so does Kadabras, and Alakazam sort of comes from Abracadabra. It's just like a mystical phrase. In terms of the basis, they're all based on mystical things. Of course, Abra could be some sort of mystic, Kadabra more of a magician, same as Alakazam. But in terms of their actual physical sort of basis, they have characters of goats or foxes because of the ears and the faces and such, and generally magicians. And then looking at Mega Alakazam, because it's now grown a huge beard, it's leveled up, it's gained some power, it's now a sorcerer rather than just a magician or a spoon bender. So that's their progression there. Then with the equivalent trio of Machop, Machoke and Machamp, of course they're all based on bodybuilders, who would have guessed, as well as of course in Machamp's case some gods with more than two sets, more than two arms. The name of course Macho and Chop, Macho and Choke and Macho and Champ, very simple there. Then Bellsprout, Weepinbell and Victreebel, of course in terms of names we have Bell and Sprout, so Bell referring to the shape of its head, same with Weepinbell and sort of same with Victreebel as well, Weeping including the weeping because of its lower face I suppose, its weeping face, and Victreebel Victory because it's evolution. In terms of the actual basis, they're based on pitcher plants, which you can see at the picture here, so basically plants where they catch flies and then they just eat them. So then next up we have Tentacle and Tentacruel, of course, based on jellyfish. Naming coming from Tentacle and Cool, Tentacle and Cool, and Tentacle and Cruel, who would have guessed. In terms of the actual jellyfish, we have either the box jellyfish or possibly the Portuguese man o' war, because they have some similarities there, some interesting ones at least. And then with the Geodude, Graveler and Golem trio, of course Geodude and Graveler are based on boulders, Golem's sort of based on a boulder as well. You could argue it's based on a tortoise as well because it's like a shell, but I see more of a boulder, and of course those boulders sort of shaped like the tectonic plates of the earth because it's cracked up in different ways. In terms of the naming, we have Geo and Dude, we have Graveler, which comes from gravel, and then Golem is literally like a golem, so we used to build golems to watch over. In terms of the Alolan form, of course, they get this magnetite added to us, this black rock, which just basically links in with the electric typing. And in terms of Golem's sort of the shape on top of its back, it could be like a magnet, or you could say it's a railgun thanks to the little yellow teeth on the inside. So basically just linking with the electricity typing there. Then with Ponyta and Rapidash, of course, Ponyta's name comes from pony and possibly bonita, which means obviously like cute, because it's a little cute pony. Rapidash, of course, though, is a combination of rapid and dash. In terms of basis, they're generally based on sort of fiery steeds from Mythology, and of course Rapidash has some basis of a unicorn too, thanks to that horn on its head. Then with Slowpoke and Slowbro, of course Slowpoke's name comes from just Slowpoke, you're such a Slowpoke dude, and Slowbro of course is just a combination of slow and bro. In terms of the actual design basis, Slowpoke could be like an otter, it could be a hippo, it could be a huge salamander, something like that. There's a few different ways to go about it. And Slowbro actually bears a lot of resemblance to a hermit crab thanks to its shell on its tail, although it's not really the same sort of animal. It does bear a lot of resemblance to it in that sense. Of course, we have a Mega Slowbro, although there's not an extra bit of extension in terms of basis, it's very similar, apart from the fact that its shell is basically eating it now, which is quite an interesting turnaround. Next up we have Magnemite and Magneton. The name Magnemite comes from magnetite, as we talked about just now, and the name Magneton comes from magneton, very similar, so just basically names that were already around, just slightly altered to make a bit more sense. In terms of the basis, they're based on magnets, there's not a huge amount extra to that, of course you can see some screws and stuff on their body, so links in that way, just magnets and magnetism in general. Then we have Farfetch'd. The name comes from far-fetched because it is a very far-fetched sort of thing, but in terms of the basis, of course, is a duck, but the actual basis of it holding a leek comes from the phrase, a duck comes bearing green onions, which is just basically like a weird saying in Japanese, so that's where that comes from there's no real basis apart from that. More flying types next, though we have Doduo and Dodrio. Doduo's name coming from Dodo and Duo, Dodrio's name coming from Dodo and Trio because of the heads. Now, while the names are based on Dodo, it's not as linked to a dodo. They bear a lot more resemblance to ostriches or emus or possibly moas. Basically any flightless bird that is in this sort of body shape they could be based on. Then we have Seal and Dugong. Seal comes from seal, very simply, and Dugong is a combination of dew, obviously dew and water in the mornings, and Dugong, which is very similar to their design basis, because Seal is a baby seal and then Dugong is a dugong, so there's not really a huge stretch of imagination there. Then we have Grimer and Muck next. Grimer's name comes from grime and Muck's name comes from muck, and very simply they're based on sludge, toxic sludge and stuff like that. And similarly in their Alolan form, they are based on oil slick, thanks to their very shiny and colourful colouring. Back to water types though, with Shelder and Cloyster. Shelder's name comes from shell, who would guess, and Cloyster's name is a combination of clam and oyster. In terms of the basis, Shelder is a clam, and Cloyster is it could say it's a clam because it has a black pearl on the inside, but it's more particularly based on an animal or a member of the Spondylus genus because of the sort of spiky shell it has. Then we have some ghosts in Ghastly, Haunter and Gengar. Ghastly's name comes from, it's ghastly basically generally, Haunter's name comes from Haunt and Hunter, and then Gengar's name comes from Doppelganger because it's based on a shadow, like a human shadow, very similar there. Ghastly itself is based on a cartoon ghost, although toxic gases could play an effect there because it is a part poison type. Haunter particularly is based on a dealer, which is a ghost or a spirit that can pass through walls, because it's seen doing that quite a lot on the anime at least. And then Gengar, as mentioned, human shadow, but it has some basis with the Cheshire Cat because of its face. You can see it's very similar there, it's a very spooky face, because the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland can fade in and out, it dissipates, sort of like a ghost, so hence the linking there. Of course, we also have Mega Gengar. There isn't a huge amount of extra sort of basis here because it's very similar to normal Gengar. The only extra thing is the eye in the centre of its head, which is like an all-seeing eye Illuminati sort of thing, so that could link in, there. Then we have Onyx. Its name comes from the jewel Onyx, very similar, very simply rather, and in terms of its basis, it's a snake. It's a rock snake Pokemon, so it could be based on a snake. Worms as well, because they eat ground, so it's literally a ground snake. Or it could be based on a worm, which were sort of dragon-like creatures that were snakes without any arms. Also then, we have next up Drowsy and Hypno. Drowsy's name comes from drowsy, as in I'm a bit sleepy, and Hypno comes from hypnosis. In terms of the basis, they're both based on the Baku creature, which was basically a creature that ate bad dreams. And in terms of actual design basis, Drowsy is based on a tapir, whereas Hypno could be very similar to tapir, but its nose looks a lot like a proboscis monkey's nose, so there could be some relation there. Then with Krabby and Kingler, the names very simply come from Krabby, and also Crab or Krabby, and then Kingler is a king and angler, because in terms of basis, Krabby is a normal crab, whereas the Kingler is a fiddler crab because of this extra big arm, and obviously angler crabs are a thing too, hence the naming. Then we have Voltorb and Electrode. In terms of naming, we have Volt and Orb for Voltorb, and then Electrode is Electric and Explode. And in terms of the design basis, they're very simply based on the Pokeball because they have the same colour scheme and they're meant to be mistaken for the Pokeball. Following up with Execute and Executor, we have, in terms of Execute's name, we have Execute, Egg, and Cute. In terms of why Execute is there, who knows, but Egg and Cute make a lot of sense. And Executor, we have Egg and Executor, because it executes apparently. I don't really know why it links in there with its sort of theme, but it does. In terms of the basis, Execute is based on, as well as eggs, it could be seeds of a plant, because they are grass types, and then Executor, as well as being based on a coconut tree, could very well be based on the Jumenju tree, which is a tree with human heads, but they were always smiling. And if you look at Executor's heads, they are always smiling. In terms of the Alolan form, of course, there's not much extra basis for Executor because it's basically just got a longer neck, but you could throw back here to the old packaging where you actually see an Executor with a very long neck, which could be a bit of sort of a hint for later on. Following up with another set of possible Alolan forms, we have Cubone and Marowak. In terms of the names, we have Cubone, which is a combination of cub and bone because it's a lower evolution, and Marowak is a combination of marrow for bone marrow and whack because of its huge bone. In terms of the actual basis here, there's not a huge amount to go off of. You could say, right, okay, they're like little dinosaurs because they are like some bipedal dinosaurs. You could also say they're like primitive people because we used to wear skulls and such, that could link in there using bone tools. In terms of the Alolan form for Marowak, of course, the only difference here is the obviously colouring, but as well as the bone that has fire on it. Of course, this could come from sort of fire dance, including Fire Knife, as you can see a picture of here, because it's very similar in that sort of sense there. Then we're shifting on to some fighting types with Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, a combination of Hit Monster and Bruce Lee, and then Hit Monster and Jackie Chan, because Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan are famous film stars relating to Kung Fu and stuff like that. In terms of the actual design basis, Hitmonlee seems to be just like a personification of Taekwondo because of these long stringy legs and arms, because they are obviously actions used quite a lot in Taekwondo, whereas Hitmonchan is obviously just a personification of boxing. It looks quite like a boxer because of its high shoulders and obviously boxing gloves there. Then next up we got Lickitung. Of course, the name is a combination of lick and tongue. In terms of its base, it's a bit of a more cryptic one because there's nothing that really looks like it. You could argue it's a lizard with a long tongue because there are a lot of those, like chameleons and such. Or you could argue a bit of basis with the Iguanodon, obviously a dinosaur, because of the thumbs are very similar to Lickitung there. Of course, I'm guessing it has a fairly long tongue too, who knows? Then we have Coughing and Wheezing. Coughing's name comes from coughing and Wheezing's name comes from wheezing. Of course, both things that toxic gas would make you do because they have a very large basis in toxic gas because of literally how they look, and obviously how they look also linked into naval mines because they look like a naval mine. Who would guess that? Then we have Rhyhorn and Rhydon following up. Rhyhorn's name is a combination of rhino or rhinoceros and horn, and similarly Rhydon is rhinoceros and don. Don being a Greek word for tooth because dinosaurs were similarly named like that. In terms of the actual real life basis, of course, we have Rhyhorn, which is a rhino. Rhydon similarly, but there was also a good bit of linking into ceratopsids, which were dinosaurs like the Triceratops because of its sort of its general look, I suppose you could say, the armour on its body. Then we have Chansey to follow up. In terms of the name, we have Chance and Chansey. Chance and Chansey it's basically just, you know, it links in together like that because it's a very chancy Pokemon. In terms of the actual real life basis, it's probably just based on a marsupial because it has obviously this little egg in its pouch, so very similar to any of these Pokemon could be linked into it there. But the egg might link into the fact that it could be based more on like a, you know, a chicken maybe, something like that, more than a mammal, but who knows. Tangela then, next up, is a combination of Tangle and Medusa, because of course it's based on Medusa, but instead of snakes for hair, it has vines. Then we have Kangaskhan next up, which is a combination of Kangaroo and Genghis Khan, funnily enough. The reason for that being, yes, okay, it's based on a kangaroo, but its body shape, it looks a lot like Mongolian armour worn. Also, Genghis Khan links into Mongolia pretty well, so I guess that's the link in there. Pretty interesting. In terms of the Mega Evolution, there's no extra basis here, apart from the fact that we now have a mother and child rather than the mother holding on to the child, which is, you know, fairly simple there. Then we have Horsea and Seadra. Horsea comes from Seahorse, and Seadra is a combination of Seahorse and Hydra, linking into the water typing. In terms of the basis, Horsea, of course, Seahorse, who would have guessed? And then Seadra, the spikes and the fins on it come possibly from a lionfish, because you can see its similarities to the spikes there, and it's poisonous, I suppose. Even more water types to follow, with Goldeen and Seaking next up. Goldeen being a combination of Goldfish and Queen, Seaking being a combination of Sea and King, both based on Goldfish, Seaking in particular based on the Shubunkin Goldfish because of its colouring. Then we have Staryu and Starmie. Staryu's name, of course, a combination of star or starfish and Yu. Now, Yu is Japanese for fish, you would guess that. And Starmie's name, combination of starfish and me. And in English, me is considered the corruption of me, as opposed to you, so Staryu, Starmie makes a bit more sense, but me can also be gem or jewel from Japanese. In terms of the basis, of course, starfish play a big part there. In terms of Starmie, because of the extra set of arms, it could be based on a crown of thorn starfish, but since Toxapex has now taken this over, it might just be basically starfish with two sets of arms. Then we have Mr. Mime next up, of course based on some sort of mime or clown or jester, thanks to all of its different appearances and factors working in there. Of course, the name comes from mime. Followed by Scyther, which is a combination of scythe and sharper, so very sharp blades basically. It's based on a praying mantis, but the fact it has wings could link in to more being based on a mantid fly because of its wings and able to fly around a bit more agile than a praying mantis. Followed up then by Jinx. The name comes from just simply Jinx, and the basis might be, it's argued a bit, but it could be like a Nordic woman or a Viking woman, and it could be linked into opera ladies, or how we say it's not over to the fat lady sings. Jinx could be in, you know, sort of a interpretation of that there. Then we have Electabuzz, the name being a combination of electric and buzz. It's based on an Oni, which was a horned ogre which wore tiger skin and was sometimes referred to as the god of lightning or thunder, so it's a pretty cool one there. Followed up by Magma, its counterpart. The name comes just basically from magma, and in terms of basis, it's based on a booby, which is a bird, but of course there's some other factors going in there, like iguana has the spikes down its back, and it is based on some sort of mythical creature as well, the Karura, which is a bird-like creature which could breathe fire, so I guess sort of like a counterpart to Electabuzz there. This is then followed up by Pinsir, of course, another bug. The name comes from Pinsir, not very too hard to figure out, and it's based on a stag beetle, which is fairly obvious. In terms of its Mega Evolution, again, nothing much extra added on here, it's fairly simple in that sense. Next up, one more single Pokemon, we have Tauros. The name comes from Taurus, obviously related to different sorts of bulls, and also the Taurus constellation possibly. In terms of its design, it's based on a bull, or possibly a bison, and of course its tail is like a cat o' nine tails whip, because it has obviously the three different tails, as well as whip-like additions on the end. Then followed up by Magikarp and Gyarados, of course. Magikarp is a combination of magic and carp, and Gyarados is a combination of Gyakusatsu and Dosu. Now these two words basically mean lot of destruction, basically linking in with Gyarados' destructive nature. In terms of the basis, Magikarp is based on an Asian carp, but the magic link in comes in when we look at Gyarados. Gyarados is based on some form of sea serpent or sea dragon, but particularly the legend of the Dragon Gates, which said that any carp that jumped over the Dragon Gate turned into a dragon or a sea serpent. So it's a very direct link here to Magikarp and Gyarados' evolution line. Again, in terms of Mega Gyarados, there's nothing extra here, it just gets a bit more menacing. Following this up with Lapras, its name comes from Laplace, which is a reference to Pierre-Simon Laplace, who was a mathematician who wrote several books on the mathematical properties of the sea and the tides. Very interesting there. In terms of its design basis, it could be designed on the Loch Ness Monster possibly, but more directly it could be based on a plesiosaur, or even going further, a Placodont, which has the sort of the helmet and the horn and stuff like that. Not the helmet, the covered back and such. Basically dinosaurs and Loch Ness Monster. Next up we have Ditto. Its name is literally Ditto, saying like, oh, Ditto, same, you know, because obviously it can transform. And in terms of its basis, it was actually confirmed by one of the directors or the developers and whatnot that it's based on a smiley face, you know, its faces at least. But in terms of its design, it's based on an amoeba, which is a single-celled organism, very similar to Ditto because it's looks single-celled at least. Then we have some evolutions with Eevee, Vaporeon, Jolteon and Flareon. Eevee's name comes from evolution and such. Vaporeon's name is a combination of vapor and eon, vapor so water, and then eon is the sort of suffix for every evolution. Jolteon we have jolt, and then Flareon we have flare, linking into their typings. In terms of the design basis, Eevee is most likely a fennec fox. Vaporeon could be any sort of creature really. It could look like a feline, a canid, anything you want. And of course the ears and then the fin on top of his head coming from a tropical fish, or even a mermaid. Jolteon wise, it could be a herding dog, a coyote, but in terms of the electric link in there, it could be based on a Raiju, which is a mythical creature with body of thunder, which could appear as a cat. And of course this is a similar thing to what Raikou is based on. In terms of Flareon, we have basically in terms of its design a Pomeranian dog because of all the fluff around it, and possibly a lion's mane around its head because it just give it a bit of extra coolness there, because Flareon doesn't have much luck. Then we have Porygon, of course, the name comes from Polygon, and in terms of its design, it's based on the polygon mesh, which is the sort of things you get when you get animations and you get all these different shapes to then blend together eventually and look like an actual 3D model. Then some fossils, we have Omenity and Omastar. They're both based on ammonites, and of course the name links in there from ammonite, and then Omastar includes the star because of, I guess, the star of its legs and its arms. Similarly, Kabuto and Kabutops are based on trilobites as well as the still existing horseshoe crab. And name-wise we have Kabuto here, which is the Japanese word for helmet because it has a helmet basically, and then Triops, similarly because trilobite, Triops and stuff like that there. Then of course we have Aerodactyl as the last fossil. This thing is based on a pterosaur, but particularly based on a certain type of pterosaur, which is a, wait for it, Ramphorhynchids, which were toothed pterosaurs, because most pterosaurs, or many pterosaurs, didn't have teeth. So that's what it's based on. Then of course the naming comes from Aero and Pterodactyl. Mega evolution wise it's pretty similar, just get some extra rocks on its body because of that rock typing. Then we have Snorlax. In terms of its naming, obviously a combination of snore and lax, meaning slow and lazy. But design basis is obviously a bear of sorts, particularly a hibernating bear since it doesn't do much, or a teddy bear, and obviously links into food comas because it can eat a lot and go to sleep for a very long time. Then we have Articuno, one of the legendaries of course. The naming comes from a combination of Arctic and Uno linking in with the whole trio, Uno, Dos, Tres. In terms of the design basis, Articuno could be linked into the Simurgh, which was a giant Arctic bird, or it could be design-wise coming from the Quetzal because of its long tails and long plumage. The next one we have is Zapdos, a combination of Zap and Dos as the name, and it's based on the Native American legend of the Thunderbird or the Lightning Bird, which is obviously a bird that could appeared when there was lightning or thunder, and hence why you have these eagles and such on these totem poles. Moltres then finally is the last of the trio. We have of course name-wise Molten and Trez, Molten Fire and such, Molten Lava, and in terms of the design basis, obviously Phoenix comes in to the first mind here, but it could also be based on the Slavic Firebird, the Bennu or the Suzaku, all sort of fiery mythical birds. Then the dragons, of course, we have Dratini, Dragon and Dragonite. Dratini and Dragon are obviously based on some sort of sea serpent, whereas Dragonite then ends up being based on a Chinese dragon because of its link to the water. Even though it's not a water type, it has a very good link to the water as a guardian of the sea, for example. Name-wise, Dratini is a combination of Dragon and Tiny, Dragonair, Dragon and Air because it can fly, and then Dragonite, Dragon and Knight since it is a fully evolved form and can be your knight in shining armour. Then, of course, finally we have Mewtwo and Mew. Mewtwo's name is a combination of Mew and 2, who would have guessed, and Mew comes from Mew, as in the cat noise, as in meow, mew, etc. Basis-wise, looking at Mew first, since it makes sense to. Mew is based on an embryo because of it's the first Pokemon sort of thing, as well as being based on a Jerboa because of its very, well, not huge ears, but very long tail particularly. Now Mewtwo of course takes basis from Mew, but also incorporates some alien-like features and characteristics because of its greyness and alien-like nature. In terms of the Mega Evolution for Mewtwo, it's very similar to normal Mewtwo, there's not much extra, apart from Mega Mewtwo Y possibly looking and picking up that embryo basis again from Mew. But that is all of Generation 1, guys. It's every Generation Pokemon covered in an overview for Origins. So I'll thank you for watching, of course. Let me know down below if you didn't know any of these Origins before, or one surprised you and you didn't quite know about it. So let me know down below, and of course, wait around and hopefully Generation 2 will come out fairly soon. There's a lot to research for it, but of course, I'll try and do that soonish. But for now, this is going to be it for today, so I shall see you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, my friends.